Welcome everybody to this is the fifth town hall that we've been doing with my co-host Tony Baldy, who has a long history in the industry. We put together the town hall, Tony and myself, to be able to kind of deal with this new reality that we're facing with COVID and how to get the industry started, how to do it safely, how to do it wisely, and hopefully get back to work and get back to doing what we love to do, which is creating.
But at the end of the day, this topic is so heavy that I felt we needed experts to really hold down the truth, people on the front lines. And so John and I discussed what we could do for people's experiences. Kevin E. West is right over there at SAG-AFTRA doing the white paper. So he also is going to field some questions about what's going on with healthcare. And I don't know if he's got new information or we're waiting on the newest, latest, greatest breaking news from SAG-AFTRA, but real information, not second, third, fourth hand information. This is from the experts front line. Okay. So again, Tony Baldy, honored to be your co-host. I want to introduce Kevin E. West. I've known Kevin E. West multiple decades. He's always been like a big brother to me, even though he's probably not older than me. I'm probably older than you are, Kevin. But Kevin is a heavy hitter in Hollywood as an actor. He's been on multiple reoccurring shows, reoccurring roles. I love when he does his Australian accent, and hopefully he'll do that for fun, because I don't want to take us too serious. We may take this topic serious, but let's not take us too serious. I'd like to throw it to Kevin E. West right now because we're getting more into his territory.
Absolutely.
So Kevin, your comments, I see your smile. I know when it's time to go to you.
when he smiles, be scared. Be really scared.
So take it away, Kevin. What are your thoughts?
Well, geez, where do you want me to start? I'll try and keep it under 10 minutes. But first and foremost, this is part of the general conversation per what Pam brought up. First of all, the line's already started. It's not going to stop. It's also just going to get worse because whether or not you're talking about travel restrictions and having test results, or what you're really coming down to, which I've seen a lot of this past week, the more we ramp up, the more productions there are going, be them union, non-union, commercial, theatrical, tiny budget, monster normal Netflix or network television. False negatives and false positives are a part of the world that we live in today. And the fact that anyone thinks that it's going to be anything other than that is the person who's searching for a magic bullet, and there isn't one. For those who have not been on these previously with me, I happen to be dealing with trying to assist people with whether they want the full-on molecular PCR. I'm also can help people out with regards to the quote-unquote rapid PCR from Abbott, which is going to present a bunch of false negatives, which are far worse than false positives. All the way down to the temperature check, but most notably, as John knows, the particular Premier Biotech serology, which is 96.5%. I want everybody here to know that it's been going on for about 2 weeks now, that we have been in the process of pitching Local 706, which is the Teamsters Union for the hair and makeup people for the Disney theme parks. So obviously that's a pretty large conversation to have. And again, I know everybody may have different ideologies politically, watch different news sources, etc. But Tony, I didn't mention this to you. John and I had previously chatted, but this fourth pitch that we made, we finally included Dr. Cadden from USC, who is the head of epidemiology for USC Keck. And he made two statements, three actually, that I want everyone to hear loud and clear, because John, what you're talking about is money. And what I've seen more and more in the last 10 days, to Pam's point, is we're getting to the place now where line producers, who made the comment a second ago that nobody knows anything but everybody's an expert?
That would be Dan.
That is literally, Dan, what I'm experiencing now almost every day, is you have people who've heard one thing, read one thing, they're going to try and tell me something that they have no clue about. If I ask them two questions, it's clear they have no idea what they're talking about, between DNA molecular to an antigen to the first 72 hours of IgM, of the first antibody your body creates versus the second antibody that your body creates. Have no effing clue what they're talking about, but yet they're a complete expert on the phone while talking to me. And again, what it comes down to is, and everybody knows this in this room from a production standpoint, is they just care about time and money. They don't care about specifics. They don't give a shit about the name of the test. They don't care what its efficacy is. Lynn and I could go back and forth on this for 2 hours. They don't give a shit. All they care about, and I've watched it happen now, because 60 days ago, Tony, when you first had me on, there were only a handful of places you could get, quote unquote, a molecular DNA test done. Now there are 24. And now everybody's trying to fight for the almighty buck. And you get people telling you, oh, we can do it for 175. Oh, we can do it for 190. But there's all the labs are overwhelmed. LabCorp even has an at-home nasal swab. People don't even like getting a nasal swab from an RN, much less they're going to shove it up their nose enough to actually get a legitimate result from a freaking at-home PCR test. It's just dumb as shit. But Dr. Cadden said 3 things, and here they are. He said, 1, serology has been the punching bag of COVID. It's absolutely true. In the last 2 months, the FDA has rescinded over 90, Len knows this, over 90 EUA approvals, which is emergency use authorization, because all this bullshit for money that got approved way back in early March and April, most of those tests were shit. And only a handful of them are going to survive, because the one I talk about, Len's got one, is 96.5%, 12 minutes, and it costs $30. No lab turnaround time. And he literally said, if I had a baseline, he said this to Disney, he said, I would test people PCR and serology to start with, because then after every 4 or 5 days, you can retest them with serology and you have a clean employee. He also made the statement that, and I've already seen it on the news, people finally talking about it, because we're sick of this lab backup shit, which is what Hollywood's going to face, which, Pam, is what's going to create all the lies. It's going to create it regarding travel. It's going to create it with regards to your budget. It's going to create it with regards to your insurance, the whole 9. My buddy Bob Stevenson, Tony, I think you know Bob's he's worked twice as much as I have. And he just got called to do a short film, and he asked his friend, what are you doing about the set? He goes, oh, the set's going to be clean. We got PP. And he goes, what about testing? He goes, well, we're not going to. And Bob goes, yeah, I'm not doing it. He goes,
so Kevin, I want to jump in as an independent film producer, right?
Sure.
I've done quite a few movies under $1 million, so definitely the grassroots type of filmmaking.
Sure.
To John Cassavetes. I choose not to go and make a movie because it's just too complicated. I would rather wait a half a year and see how this plays out. I don't live off of that income, so I can do that and then play on this internet medium and do these talk shows and get shows prepped and ready so that when 2021 hits, we can talk to the majors again. Any comments from anybody on their feeling of just sitting back a little bit? Kevin?
Are you sitting back because you're counting on a vaccine, or are you just sitting back?
I'm sitting back to see how this plays out with town hall meetings giving you information, but I will not go in the field right now. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Then let me give you a slide in between. One of the last thing I was going to say that Cadden said was, he said, watch what happens in the country in the next 30 to 45 days.
Right.
Now, part of that is just simply because we're 5 months in, 5.5 months in. The other part of that is related to school, going back to school. Because one of the things that's going to happen, Tony, and this is my overall point, and you and John have been hearing me say this, and Dan and Len too, in the next 30 to 45 days, for everybody's budget, I think you're going to wind up seeing the LA County Health Department and all of the unions with their way forward document coupled with the AMPTP. You're going to wind up seeing them have to succumb to what Cadden said, which is you've got to start testing people with serology in conjunction with PCR. And that, first of all, would bring peace of mind, and it's also 1/10 the cost. It also might help out. Ken's gone, John, but it also would potentially help out with regards to insurance costs and not having to worry about the waiver. So, Tony, I wouldn't tell you to necessarily wait off 6 months, but I would tell you that I think by end of September, the whole country is going to have a different mentality about how we're being tested and what we consider okay. And that's what I would say to an independent producer if I didn't know you at all.
So,
Ken,
I really want to say that have been just on the cutting edge every time we have a town hall meeting, and I really appreciate.
Start with both of them as a baseline. Everybody's got to remember that PCR is nucleic, but it's only nucleic and molecular at the moment.
Correct.
Once you go 4 days, this no longer matters.
Correct.
But the serology would have the active infection IgM show up then, and if it doesn't, cool. And even at the moment you start this, the latent IgG could show up. Because a lot of, and then you can at least know, well, maybe I've had it, but I'm not sick, but we should make sure. And that way everybody starts out in the same place. And that way every 4 or 5 days, you can just keep it clean.
And that is obviously doing it with $30 a pop for your crew is more realistic for independents.
Right.
I mean, we're not Pinewood Studio. Pinewood Studio can spend $1.5 million a month easily. Not that that's a wise decision or that they would want to do that, but they have the economic reality to do that. Independents don't have that reality. But what you're saying is these steps is one way for us to get back sooner rather than later, but also get back in a way that takes concern and care for the health and safety of our people.
Peace of mind, man. That's why, Pam, that's why people are going to lie, because what the unions put together is is untenable for about
Yes.
85% of the productions.
Yes.
The amount of money, I'm in conversation with a Netflix project that's a 14-week documentary, and they have 40 to 50 people. And they want it, and our union says you got to test them twice with PCR, twice every 8 days. And they're on location in Louisiana. That means they got to find a lab that can do it. They're going to pay between $200 and $250 a pop. Okay, that is 20 grand every 8 days over the course of a 14-week shoot. That's a $200,000. Now, it's a Netflix thing. Maybe Netflix wants to spend it, but to Pam's point, not everybody can afford to do that. So they're just simply either going to shirk it and risk everybody's health, or they're simply going to lie about it. And either way, none of us want to be in that position on either side of the camera. So again, this is one of the reasons why I am and have been such an advocate for, we're not, in this country in general, we're not listening to the experts enough. And a lot of the experts aren't even being allowed to speak. Well, Dr. Cadden at USC is an expert, and he's like, I'd start out with both and then just do that every 5 days. So pass that along to your producer friends and tell them, listen, it's not you don't have to necessarily be hamstrung by the thought of what it is.
And I just want to, my experience, and thank you.
All right, let's unleash those worms. Kevin, what do you know? Do you have any great breaking news about what's going on with our healthcare at SAG-AFTRA?
Well, first of all, there was an email, if you're a union member, that they are having webinar presentation. They have one said this morning. They have them on Monday and Tuesday. I suppose that's probably the union's way of somehow trying to put some lipstick on a pig, is my guess, or at least have some sense of an explanation of it. For those who don't know, I was also just on the recent SAG-AFTRA negotiating committee for the theatrical contract. That's where I'm hottest under the collar about this. Because I feel like that if we had been told, when we're already pledging confidentiality as a part of that committee, that it would have altered the way we negotiated this contract that just got ratified. My biggest frustration, and first of all, a lot of people don't realize necessarily that the health and pension plans are contributed to, but they are separate. The SAG and AFTRA pension plans still are not merged. They're still separate after 10 years. And also that the AMPTP, Alliance of Motion Picture Television Producers, does control, along with our trustees, a lot of what occurs, but they still contribute to it. They put money into it, so they wind up having a lot more control out of it. And a lot of what is upsetting people is there's a phrase we have in the pension called age in service, and you have a situation, Tony, and we talked about this, where one of the things that kind of got given away strongly in this past negotiation, in a way from rack focus of past to future, was how much we have given up now in syndication and how much we have lent ourselves towards getting money from a residual standpoint with regards to streaming content, streaming video on demand. And one of the unfortunate parts about that is it takes a lot of money away from those handful, 10 or 12 shows on half-hour drama that are older shows but still make a lot of money in syndication, such as a Happy Days. Those actors can't currently make money on streaming, and yet they're counting on their residuals to help keep them in healthcare. And this is part of what this plan change is it's going to be taking residuals away from and not allowing those residuals after the age of 65, if you've already taken your pension, will no longer go towards you being able to qualify for your health plan. Now, there's a lot, it's very complex, Tony, as you can imagine. There's a lot of wrinkles in there with them trying to adjunct Medicare and adjunct COBRA with this, and using your spouse's company plan if you have that. There's a lot of ways that they're trying to put some band-aids around this. I think most of the union membership is pissed off because this is a huge, monster structural change, which basically we just got dropped on us like a lead anvil. And to the bigger point, and I mentioned this to you yesterday, I just want to say it for the room, we've known there's been a problem for this through 18 and through 19. My frustration with this is I still see this more as a failure of 3 or 4 negotiation cycles going back 12 to 15 years, more notably 9 to 12 years, of what we haven't gotten in our negotiations to make sure that it goes into the plan. And the biggest aspect of that is the fact that our pension caps have not moved for 38 years. Basically, all the people who make millions of dollars, once they make $232,000 in television annually, and there's a weekly breakdown, or make $265,000 in a film, the producers are no longer required to put anything into a pension. that is, if we fought for that or struck for it, that is probably enough in 3 years to make our health plan completely solvent. We would make up 60, 80, 150 million dollars, which is exactly why they pushed us off. So just fathom that for a second, that our pension, the money we take in for our pension, is basically as if you were paying for a house that was 1982 prices. That's one of the reasons why the plan is currently headed towards insolvency. They've been supposedly working on this for 5 or 6 months. They didn't tell any of us about it. COVID seems to exacerbate it and make them have to drop the hammer sooner. But I'm just sharing with you that the biggest outrage, and what I'm fearful of, is you're going to have a bunch of, in an already union-busting administration and society in general, whether you want to be angry at Jeff Bezos or anybody else, this is going to cause a lot of actors to say, fuck the union, I'm just going to go FICOR, and that's going to make the situation even worse for us.
And that's why I wanted to bring it up. This is today's prohibition for acting like it was for alcohol running. And I do see a lot of, in my low budget world, a lot of that happening. A lot of the films that are actually filming today, that I see the final products being put up on YouTube and Facebook and Instagram, they shot it. They're shooting not anything that's going to go to the majors, but the little bread and butter and the little crumbs that are happening. And so do you feel that the Producers Guild is on one side and the SAG-AFTRA is on another side and IATSE and AFL-CIO is on another side? Or do you think we as unions can come together to protect the unions?
Well, you have a couple of, that's a big question, Tony. The first, the biggest issue I have is that we have done pattern bargaining for far too long. The fact that we, up until this year, we have always followed the Directors Guild and the Writers Guild. We only flipped the Writers Guild this year because of COVID. And we supposedly were sold down the river that this would be an advantage to us, and yet we didn't take advantage of it. But the bottom line is, with what has happened in the last 2 decades since the turn of the century, our similarities in the idea of pattern bargaining have begun to vastly differ. And to your point, I will tell you that there are people that I know who also know writers and some showrunners who very much want to get together between SAG-AFTRA and the Writers Guild and be a lot more in tune before we get to our next negotiation, because our similarities to the DGA and us having to eat crow after they do shit and agree to shit that doesn't even apply to them, and then we have to actually try and pattern that, or the AMPTP tries to use it against us. That is one of the reasons why we are where we are today, and one of the reasons why the income into these plans has been so severely damaged over the course of the last 10 or 12 years, leading to, I believe, in the state of COVID, when you finally have an actual problem that occurs, as we say all the time about income inequality and what hasn't happened in the last 35 years, is you don't have any backup to hang on to. So the plan's been losing money severely since 18, and we were at like 81 million and 41 million, and that was projected to be 141 million. And that's what has led to this. I don't know if we can go back or if any of this is retroactive, but this is going, I know there are some protections to it, but there are going to be a lot of people who don't qualify. There's going to be a lot of people who've been using the plan a lot, who don't put a lot into it. And they are basically ensuring that some of the age and service people, it may not be a ton of members, but if it was your grandmother, if it was your mother, you would be pretty pissed off if she was promised insurance for life and now she's not going to have it.
Right. I have to add to that. In driver's ed, we watch crash videos to make us more aware of driving a vehicle is dangerous. And when I was coming up, I was watching videos of what it was like before unions. My mother was from the UAW, so we would see what it was like at GM. We would see the labor, the third world country labor fees that were being paid, and then the unions got together, and it was power in numbers. We're losing the numbers because people aren't coming together. And again, this platform is why I talked to John about creating this platform, so that all of these sources of information could be at one stop. So we could share from front lines and from past history experience how we can move forward and still be creative, still be financially responsible, and still have protection in numbers. And that's what this whole platform is about. It is, Tony. But also, I mean, the problem is what I've seen for the last 4 or 5 negotiation cycles, which is why I'm mentioning it, is that we have spent a lot of time in this. It will not surprise Lynn. It won't surprise Dan. It won't surprise anybody. It won't surprise you, Tony, is that we've spent a lot of our time what feels like negotiating to make sure that we take care of our quote-unquote top 1.5%. Right. So that they're happy. And yet the funny part about that is by not raising pension caps, we're actually then not actually helping everybody else's insurance plan
by ensuring money off of the guys who are the top earners by not increasing those caps.
What about this, Kevin?
The double-edged sword that's not helping at all. I did comment, Tony, to somebody who posted something who talked about, fuck the union, I'm going FICOR. And I said, listen, just realize that if you do it because of this, when you're making about as much for your independent film as Charlie Chaplin made at the end of his career, don't come crying to me, because that's exactly what they want. They want people to jump ship. They want to bust this union. They've been trying to do it for more than 15 years. John, don't get me started on the fucking things our union hasn't fucking done, because Tony and I have talked what they haven't fucking done for the last 2 decades with regards to technology, with regards to our website, the fact that we don't have an app so commercial producers can easily fucking figure out in 15 minutes, like any 22-year-old can on the other site, how much your commercial is going to cost. Dude, we'd be here all day.
I agree. And
in terms of me defending you on that.
Yeah,
sure.
all I'm saying is that the independents, the small guys, need to be treated differently than the studios, and the ones who have the kind of profits that they're making, they can share that. Also, like you laid out, which I would agree with, you got a situation where your union is protecting the actors who are making 20, 30, 40, $50 million on a picture.
And they're not going after the caps, which actually help make our health plan solvent. That's what I'm saying. They don't go to the wall for that. Well, not to mention platform switch, which was one of the big things that happened during this negotiation, which I understood, but again, it was something that we gave them, and we just didn't get a lot back. I understood the reason for platform switch, but at the same time, if you're going to give all the big boys the latitude to basically cast a project and hire people under the presumption that it's going to be a network show, and then decide before it actually goes to air, nah, we're not going to have that be an NBC show. We're actually going to switch that to NBC Peacock, and we'll honor your first contract, but after that, we're going to renegotiate, and you're not going to get the kind of residuals you thought you were going to get. The fact that we gave them that flexibility and didn't get more back, for example, Tony, in terms of pension caps, is just an example of how I'm saying 3 or 4 negotiation cycles. We keep doing this every 3 years, and all we keep doing is going backwards. And that's why the health plan's in trouble.
Or digital, Kevin, you have a comment, but I know you can do it digitally.
Yeah, that's one of the issues that happened during negotiations with regards to the background community, because it also is the same thing with voiceover. I always use the horse and buggy reference. You can sit around and bitch about it all you want, but the bottom line is eventually the car was going to put the horse and buggy out of business, other than nostalgia 70 years later when you're getting married rolling down Manhattan at midnight. So the bottom line is, whether we like it or not, the end of the background actor being the predominant real live human on set, that is going away, and also the ability to take 15 seconds of your voice and basically build an entire script out of it. So I just told people in the union, I said, you can sit around and bitch about it, or you can fucking put something in the contract now that makes them have to pay you for doing that as a de-archive, or what I like to call stem cell research usage of your voice, and actually make sure that right now we establish it and start getting paid for it now, so you don't just lose it because it's gone later, because those two things are coming for sure.
Great job.
So welcome this is our 4th town hall that we're doing, and restarting in the film industry and dealing with the issues of COVID-19 and trying to get restarted in the film industry. Is Kevin E. West from SAG-AFTRA, who's been on multiple times for us. Welcome, Kevin. So that's when I shared to them some alternatives. Some of them came from Kevin, and I told them to contact Kevin. I think they did. I'm not sure. And with that, I'll throw it to Kevin.
Thanks, you guys. Just for everybody that's here today, what I would say, like when Rick speaks or anybody else speaks, I would, for the health of all of us and for everybody going forward, please include part of what John just said, and more than that. If you would, please make sure when you talk about testing that you include what kind of test you were doing, and I literally mean the name of the test, not just PCR, but also how it was done. Because currently there are so many ways to get quote unquote tested. It's important that we discern whether or not it's a PCR test, that we discern whether or not it's an oral swab, whether it is a mouth swab or it's an oral rinse. There are 3 different ways to collect the test, and also whether or not that's something that's being done for and paid for by your production, or whether or not it's what John just described, which is I have a funny feeling what a lot of people are going to try and pull off is to somehow have people go and get a test on their own. And let me just remind everybody, showing up having gotten tested without the results means nothing. And also what John said is that, even though PCR is the gold standard because it's a molecular test, it's 98.5%, there are continual false positives and continual false negatives in all of these, because John already knows my engagements with the Producers Guild and IATSE and Writers Guild and Directors Guild, and with my own union, SAG-AFTRA, is fairly frustrating because nobody will draw a line in the sand and nobody will make a decision, because I'm a huge advocate of one serology test that is the best one, period. It's Premier Biotech, and that's because it is the only serology test that waited until after June 1st to get its FDA EUA approval. It's the only one that's had clinical trials in 3 countries, and it's the only one that's 96.5% accurate for both the presence of the COVID virus and the antibody, which happens 12 minutes on set in your presence. So there's a couple of ways between serology and PCR to get tests, but just make sure for everybody, so that we stay on the same page, how your crew and cast got tested and how it was accomplished, because typically labs are just overwhelmed. So unless you're going to a concierge lab or going someplace and paying a lot of money, it is hard to get quick turnaround. So that's just a platform, Tony and John, that I wanted to set forth for everyone, so that none of us are confused when we at least talk about just the testing part, not the PPE part or the cleanliness of a set part. Well, all of the serology ones, again, it really comes down to accuracy, because IgG and IgM are what all serology tests are. So the difference would be simply the sensitivity and specificity, because they're all going to be fairly quick.
Right.
5 minutes or 12 minutes, versus 48 hours is simply what it is. So any finger prick serology test is going to be fast. That's why it's a rapid test. So the difference is simply going to become, in terms of what Craig is saying, the reason why I've looked at all the ones that were approved. And by the way, the FDA is currently pulling about 20 EUAs. And for those who don't know, that means emergency use authorization. Because we declared a national emergency, the FDA is allowed to actually approve things without going through the entire FDA process. So every single COVID test out there, inclusive of the PCRs, none of them have official FDA approval. They have FDA EUA, which is emergency use authorization. And so, Craig, I'm excited for this and excited for that. Right now, Premier Biotech at 97% with clinical trials in 3 countries, Mexico, China, and the U.S. And the clinical trials were done by USC in LA County. So it's still going to be my gold standard for serology until somebody tops that. But it's nice to know that that there's another one coming along. Yeah, I just wanted to quickly add that the lab issue is going to continue to be one. Again, it depends on who you're dealing with and how you're functioning. But currently, the network of people that I'm dealing with that are distributing for Premier, they can basically get an RN, and a PCR guy's tests also have names. All of these things are listed on Johns Hopkins website if they've been approved. Johns Hopkins is no screwing around. They keep track of every single thing and what its approval means. And the bottom line is there only a list of certain tests, PCR or serology, that are actually approved and EUA approved to be used for actual diagnostic testing. And they're all they're all in Johns Hopkins site. So the only 2 PCR swab tests that I'll talk about are Solgent and Osang. Those are the 2 best. So I'm just trying with this group going forward, whoever you talk to, emanate out to, always make sure no different than a type of shoe. We don't go in and just say, hey, I bought a tennis shoe. Somebody goes, what brand did you buy? What model did you buy? Same thing here. What type of test you're buying matters. It matters a lot. What its history and what it's done matters a lot. So the people I deal with, All Green Health Services, they now have a dedicated lab in Burbank. They're doing this mostly for Hollywood, so that there's one lab that's dedicated to turn it around. And as you brought up earlier, John, depending on who you're dealing with, because money, we may not buy happiness, but it sure as hell can buy fast turnaround time. Right. That's for sure. So depending on what you're willing to pay, but most of them are in, swabs out, with any kind of guaranteed turnaround is probably going to be in the ballpark of about $250 a person. You don't really want to spend more than that. You don't have to. And there is now, because of some MIT boys, again, who has the access to this, there's now an oral rinse collection method for people that don't like to have it shoved up their nose. But you can buy the swab tests and do them on location. if you have a network of people like we do, we can address any set, any place in America and bring people to you, the test to you, and take them to a lab. So part of the issue with production is simply, what are you dealing with? How are you going to collectively get everybody? That's what Len's talking about. That's all of what we're dealing with, because PCR tests and serology tests are so far apart in the sense of a serology test happens on site in 10 minutes. But again, right now, I've done the research. Until Craig's test is approved, I have not run across anyone, and I've been doing this for 45 days now, researching my butt off with these guys. I haven't found anyone, and I know it will occur. There will be new ones that meet that standard. But the clinical trials part of this, and I wanted to say, Lynn, one thing about SAG-AFTRA, everybody understand this because I'm pulling my hair out with my own effing union.
Right.
Number one, SAG-AFTRA didn't put any protocols, as no one did, in their white papers regarding testing, which just makes me want to punch somebody in the nose.
Right.
Secondly, they're now telling people on the side what we talked about, John, that all of a sudden they've just invented out of thin air this, well, if you're on a theatrical production of any kind, they want you to do PCR 2 times a week. That's what they said to your guy, right, John?
That is correct.
Which from a cost standpoint is effing absurd.
Yes.
It's gonna knock out 90-some% of the productions like Rick that are trying to get something done and have any kind of budget for this shit.
Absolutely.
Unless you have a best friend who's a lab technician who owns a PCR machine and has some friend in Hangzhou, China, who can get PCR tests for $10 a piece. And if, then great. But here's the sad part. This past week, there are 2 or 3 or 4 instances related to commercial productions. If you guys don't know this, SAG-AFTRA negotiates its theatrical contract and its commercial contract with 2 separate entities. It negotiates with the AMPTP theatrically, negotiates with the JPC commercially. The AMPTP signed on and agreed to the white papers from SAG. So they will do whatever SAG and they agree to. Commercially, the JPC didn't. So currently, most of the calls I'm getting for the premiere tests are from commercial production companies because they're smaller crews. They usually shoot for less days, and they're happy to use a test that's 96.5%, 97% that's got clinical trials and was done right here in LA County and is backed by the head epidemiology at USC. And SAG-AFTRA can't say a thing about it because the JPC didn't agree to anything that SAG says. And I'm still sharing with you, and from Craig's standpoint, if you've paid attention to the articles about serology going back 4 months to where we are today, you're going to hear more and more going forward that if the test has met the benchmark that we're talking about, it's never going to be as good as PCR. PCR is a molecular test. It's not ever going to get up that high, but they're going to be more and more popular because they are rapid, they are fast, as long as you have 1 or 2 choices that are way up here with the backing. But nobody in this town, unfortunately, is on the same damn page. I talked to Davo about it. It's just absolutely absurd. And the more you go out of town and go other places, I'm glad there's a lab in Alabama, but you still have to send a FedEx overnight to go someplace. Shooting in Memphis, shooting in Mississippi, you're going to be stuck at the behest of what's going on in that town. And so the more questions you can ask, and the more you can try to get somebody to help you out so that it's all self-contained and it's not tests going this way and RNs going that way. And remember, a doctor has to actually order the lab results. This is another wrinkle inside of all this. They charge you out the ass for all of this, but you really should be trying to keep your PCR, whether it's oral rinse, swab oral, or nasal oral. Try and keep the collective cost between $225 and $250 a person. And then look at the rapid serology if you want to look at that. And outside of cleanliness and PPE, that's just what we're dealing with.
So there's no way that IATSE covers any of this, right? Even an initial test under their health plan?
Do you mean in terms of whether or not their health plan would actually
Pay
be
for it?
willing to help the production pay for the cost of the crew being tested?
Right.
I with all due respect, Dave, I think that would literally be something that Steve Dayan or any of the people, or Mike Miller at the top at IATSE could certainly engage with. I know that SAG's not going to do it. That's a different subject in terms of their pension and health plan, but I think it's plausible. I think it's a fair question. But I wonder if Steve Day and the guys that are the heads of IATSE, I wonder if they have. I mean, they haven't put anywhere. I haven't seen an announcement. I've been engaged with some crew people, but I haven't seen them bring up anything as a collective regarding a group of crew on a production and being willing to process the paperwork of that being something that they could co-opt and then supplement back to the production the cost of that. I don't have any news about it. Doesn't mean there isn't. It's just I don't have any. But there are. Craig is correct. There are blood draw, which sounds like what you're saying. There are blood draw serology tests, but the Premier Biotech is a finger prick test.
Okay.
And I'm presuming, Craig, yours is going to be too, right? Finger prick?
Yes, my guy said ours was the first one. I'll ask him about
No, it's
that.
not.
And then I'm going to come later to Kevin. And Kevin mentioned the difference between the SAG contract versus the commercial contract and why we can do it. I want to ask that question later of Kevin. Jump into Kevin just real quick, because Kevin, so obviously the challenge, and you laid it out very clear, the serology test is not accepted yet. And I know you expressed your frustration with that. Mm-hmm. So if I wanted to go with a serology with you, and I wanted to say get 100 to 200 kits to be able to do this test, take me through that process. Take us through that process, because I may be doing that. I may be calling you up tomorrow morning to get that happen.
It would be as simple as filling out a couple of documents. Authorization of purchase order would be based on where you want it shipped and how fast you want it shipped to you. What you can do is by courier overnight, 2-day priority, or ground, very common for any of those things. And then once on set, it's just literally a matter of, the most junior EMT level person can administer these tests. I just call it like a TSA line. You basically are just going to take an extra 15 minutes to quote unquote be on set, because you're going to get your finger swiped with alcohol, punched, push the blood out, take the little capillary, squeeze it, pick up the blood, drop it in the cassette, drop 2 drops of buffer fluid in it, and you have your answer in 12 minutes. Whether or not you're IgG positive or IgM positive. And again, but this is what people don't discuss, and this is what I've tried to talk to SAG-AFTRA about, because I was on the negotiating team. I do know David White and Gabrielle well. I did put the list in the chat for everybody. I do know, and I'm not here to debate or argue with anybody, but Johns Hopkins does keep a running list of the things that have actually been approved for the United States of America that are allowed to be used as a diagnostic test. That website, that link I just put there, there's like 4 or 5 different sections of how they break it up, because there are tests that are only for this thing or only for that thing. But ones that would be, that SAG would even consider, or that I would think you might want to consider, are going to be on that list. And PCR being molecular and serology being blood. But yes, because they have, the JPC does not draw that line of distinction, and everything that I've been reading, which is part of what Craig said, serology is not ever going to be in this vein, up to 98.5%. It just isn't going to get there by definition of what a COVID virus is. But they call it the novel coronavirus for a reason, because it's new. It's extremely new. 4 months of something is not a lot of time. But every single thing I'm reading is because they were doing data back in March and April, right? You see what they wrote about stuff up until the end of April. Now you start seeing data coming in, like Lynn's talking about, data coming in, and you start getting, with the thousands of cases we have, slowly but surely, we're going to work our way down to what I would say to you, John, which is, if somebody tests positive for the antibody, or somebody tests positive for the detection of the virus, you don't have to yell or scream or lose your mind. You just send them off set and have them get a PCR test. Instead of having to spend what they're making Dave spend, or trying to make Dave spend, Dave ain't going to do it, is, $50,000. You do it as a 1-2 punch. Everyone's tried to make this a binary choice. We as Americans don't like this stuff. We're like, well, where's the magic bullet? Where's the solution? Right now, 98.5 is the best you're going to get. So instead of saying, well, it is either PCR or serology, no. Serology and if. It's improv. It's yes and. It's like, okay, well, if somebody comes up with one of those, because your body, everybody's body is different, but your body doesn't even create the antigen yet in 2 to 5 days. Also, your typical human body doesn't create the antibody into 7 to 21 days. And most antibody tests only test, I use the phrase loud enough, It only tests for the antibody to be in a place of 80 to 100 in your body. So after about 30 days or 40 days, the antibody goes down to a level in your body that most of the serology tests, they're not even going to pick it up. So there's a window of timing, which we all face in production. That's fine. Like Dave said, it's 18, 20 days. Well, that's completely fine. That's within a window. But you would, same as employees, guys, we're just employees. Think about big companies' employees. Same problem. It's an extra 15 minutes, test people. I've got a friend of mine who sells shoes and deals with cheerleading camps in Atlanta. And this is exactly, he's already created a protocol because all of his employees are irresponsible young people. And so he's testing them on a Thursday afternoon. He's testing them on a Tuesday morning because of the weekend. So this is what he set up a protocol for this, which is what Hollywood still is unwilling to tell people to do, other than to say something to Dave like, well, you have to do a PCR test twice a week. And you're like, get the hell out of here, man. But commercially, they haven't done that yet. And then serology is just, it's like, I call it the pregnancy test. If you find out you're pregnant from a home thing, you go, oh, I'm pregnant, but you call your doctor. So if the serology comes up positive, go get a PCR test. I think that's going to become more of the norm in Hollywood as we get literally just over the next 30 days. I think that'll become more of the norm. Yeah, to what John's bringing up, going down the road in terms of Dan and I have had a couple of chats since we met on this Zoom. And Dan, I apologize for that. You have to chat with me extra time. But the issue of COVID compliance is somewhere between absurd and a joke and occasionally good. The COVID compliance training that, again, it doesn't matter what industry it is. It doesn't matter what moment it is. We're all old enough to know that whether it's the latest fad or people dying, it's millions. In this space, it's billions of dollars. What McKesson and Shine are charging people to distribute tests and what local urgent care is, it's absurd. I know people who have paid $500 for a serology test that's $32 out the door. I know people that have paid $2,000 for a PCR test because they can afford it. It's a joke, but
I was blessed. I went to get the PCR test. It's covered by my insurance.
Yes, and some people go down that road, and it's just it's very frustrating. But in this past week there were 2 commercial productions, not 1, 2. They didn't get shut down because they had a COVID compliant officer who was out in the car sleeping while people were on the set without masks on. So just like in anything else that we deal with, there's always going to be the clowns who give everybody else a bad name. And the old joke goes, 1% of the 99% of the laws are for 1% of the people. So despite the fact that we do have, CCOs that are supposedly going through training, there's a Facebook group called Reopening Hollywood. And if you just went on to Reopening Hollywood on Facebook and read some of the stories of people talking about the COVID compliant officers and what a scam and a joke it is, to John's point, when we're trying to cope with something that we don't like 2 words in life in general, human beings don't, fear and change. Well, if they're bad enough on their own, when you put them together, and as Lynn said, you combine it with a form of death, it's absurd. And people trying to cope with this is uncomfortable, and it doesn't help when you have an industry who's deciding to license COVID compliant officers and they're in their car sleeping. So all of these things have to be vetted. And the best thing that I can say to anybody who's on any union production, because if it's a non-union production, then the county is responsible for shutting it down. If it's a union production, please file a complaint. If you, especially Dave, in your situation, if you were paying somebody, you just fire them. But I'm just saying that the idea, some people take things seriously and some people just do it because, hey, I'll go get a certification to be a COVID compliant person and make some extra cheese while I'm out of work and not do their damn job. So it's just all over the map. So just be very, very aware that they are supposed to have standards, but it doesn't mean they will. Just as an FYI, away from testing something else. And it's also everybody else. Again, this trickles down either to the direction you said, John, of someone being on top of it or someone being lax, and then everybody becomes lax. For the people on here who don't know, I'm a longtime television actor. I was doing Righteous Gemstones in South Carolina. I wound up falling into this in where I'm at now because I happen to know the guy who's the CEO of who's distributing Premiere. But I want to get back to work, and I want to take all the years that I've been in this town. I've known Tony for 15 years, and I've been here twice that time. All the people that I know at the heads of all the unions. My whole goal is us to finally have a fucking set of protocols that people freaking follow that we can all do and that hold to a same standard, so you're not expecting surprises. It's not a curveball every time you go someplace, and we know what the hell that we're doing. That's my biggest point to this, so that we don't have to stay shut down technically until the freaking beginning of the year. I mean, that's where I'm at as a longtime television person.
I'll tell you, Viacom just announced that they're not opening till 2021, and that's CBS, Viacom, Paramount. So there may be a lot of other in your world, the TV world, that are following suit. So these independents that are trying to go are just looking for, as you know, Dave, we're just trying to find the right lane that keeps people healthy and keeps our industry moving. But the big boys, the big boys, are not moving.
NBC New York already informed their employees are not coming back to the office until after the new year. I'd vote for twice a month, because 30, I think at least right where we are, per what John just said and what Lynn's already discussed and what Craig brought up, and Craig left, but do they wind up getting their FDA EUA approval? 30 days seems a little long, at least early into this, because we're still very early into this as far as Hollywood's concerned.
Agreed.
Every single week is probably not enough time, because I'm probably going to have another 10 stories 2 weeks from now of some shit that went down that I find. But I would say, I would vote once every 2 weeks personally, in terms of just enough time for stuff to.
Yeah, I'm in favor of that. You guys raise your hand if you're in favor of every, bi-weekly. Everyone cool with that? Any objections?
Well, welcome everybody. Welcome to Third Town Hall, restarting the film industry for independence.
Where is the line where anybody could just say at any given moment, you're shut down? Where's our defense if we believe we're doing everything right, but yet maybe SAG-AFTRA says you're not? Who negotiates that?
There are honestly, Tony, only 3 conversations in this area, and one of them is crystal clear, simple. Your people are either wearing a mask on their crew or they're not. That's going to get you shut down. That's not arbitrary, and that's not subjective. They're either wearing the proper.
Sorry to cut you off. What if a caterer comes in and just for a moment, the moment that you're looking, their mask went down, and then we're responsible?
I do not. I've had a conversation with SAG's legal department, and they're not being unreasonable. Bold and Beautiful and Scott Bale's project got shut down for a reason. It wasn't a delivery person whose elasticity slipped off for a millisecond.
Exactly.
That's not the case. That's BS if somebody told you that.
Nobody told me that. I'm just asking.
So that's number one in terms of having protective gear on. Number 2 would be the cleanliness of the set, which is why, yes, as Per said earlier, a lot of the shows and people that have deep pockets in a particular world are going to have, COVID cleanliness people on set. But in general, if somebody were to show up and just be checking things, they would just be checking for people that are handling food, that they're wearing gloves, that your hair and makeup and wardrobe people have a face shield over while they're doing hair and makeup. It's going to be really basic stuff like that. All of those things are in the white papers, and with all due respect, Tony, those things are not hard to follow. Obviously, the thing that, that gets me in terms of what Steven's position is, and in terms of Kent risking money or anybody else, is that the white papers, and no one has discussed people showing up to set healthy or how you test them. And that is the part that's annoying to me, because a PCR swab test can take 1 to 7 days to get results on. So where have your people been for 1 to 7 days before they show up? And when they leave set, especially since, John, we're being specific about smaller productions, if you don't have the ability to quarantine, I just talked to someone today who's doing a 50-person crew cast thing project in Atlanta, and they wanted to talk to me about the rapid serology test because it's 97% and you have your answer in 12 minutes. So eventually what's going to happen, this is what I believe is going to happen. Now, this is conjecture. I'm projecting. This is not an answer, but I believe this is what's going to wind up occurring over time. What's going to wind up occurring over time is that your production is going, just like your employer. Just pretend you work at Starbucks or something. Doesn't matter. AIG, Costco is an employee. Don't care. Someone is going to recommend that you go get a swab PCR test, whether you get it privately and pay a little money for it, or whether you stand in line at Dodger Stadium and get it done for free. They're going to want you to have those results within 48 to 72 hours, which the labs can't guarantee, because the labs are about to get overwhelmed in this country, from Quest to everybody else. It's like intubation in beds in New York 2 months ago. Same thing is going to happen. They're going to require you to do that and show up with your negative whatever on the job. But then once you walk in the door, Tony, like I say about Disney and the hype line for riding a ride, how do you add a second layer of protection to Kent's money that he's paid for a completion bond, or to Kent's money that he's paid for his insurance guarantee, to make sure that that person is safe based on when they got the test done. And that's where the rapid serology test comes into play, that's done by Premier Biotech, which is backed by Johns Hopkins, Stanford Medical, and the epidemiologist at Keck Medical at USC. So I think it's going to become a yes and thing going forward. But at minimum, small productions at least could protect themselves by getting a very, very, very inexpensive Premier Biotech test, which starts with, you can't get them anywhere else for 20 in quantities of 20. The 2850 is, I mean, there are people out there charging like $700 and $500 for this shit. It just makes me want to vomit because it's not necessary, but that's what they're doing. It's also only 95 and a half. So the rapid serology is 97. The swab PCR test is 98 and a half. Anybody who tells you there's some 100% test, that's called a vaccine. They're lying. That's not true.
It doesn't exist.
So
Also, the test technician can screw up the swab if they don't actually handle it inside of your nose properly and get the right amount of fluid. So there's a couple issues with that as well. John, to your point, just do it twice a week. You could do the rapid serology twice a week and you'd be good.
Good. Thank you, Kevin. I was going to do a show with him, and then Tony suggested that we turn it into a town hall.
Kevin, is there anything you can say to what it's like touring right now on your book tour?
Well, I'm going to set that aside for a second, Tony, only because my book tours obviously were canceled because they were April, May.
Exactly.
They were canceled completely. But on a much more applicable statement, I am an elected delegate at SAG-AFTRA. I'm also on the negotiating committee that's actually been for the last 8 weeks negotiating our theatrical contract.
There we
which
go.
expires on June 30th. And is completely and directly affected, obviously, by COVID and the conversations surrounding that. And I want to be clear that one of the things that we haven't discussed, first of all, is how much this insurance would cost. And number two, I'm currently, Tony just already knows, I'm directly working with the Producers Guild, the PGA, to actually finish white pages that are approved, because we haven't discussed, obviously, the type of tests and whether or not those tests are accurate and how accurate they are based on what information. On top of that, the antibodies test and how accurate that is. Aside from the fact that contact tracing right now, from the CDC standpoint, from a lawsuit standpoint, which I'm with Kent on that, because Lord knows that's going to happen. I'm not saying if it happens, I'm saying when it happens, is going to be a big issue. So there's the cost of the insurance per the budget that you have. But I just had come off, Tony, which I think you know, I'd just done recurring on The Righteous Gemstones for HBO. And granted, I realize it's television, it's not film, but they're not coming back until January 2021. I mean, I literally had gotten off the plane on Friday, March 13th. And they're going to do a late episode in the year, probably, that as a lot of shows may do, that are just going to be fairly series regular related. But we have to look at what the cost of insurance is, how you're going to be able to prove or not prove in court contact tracing, which is an issue, and then just the cost of the kits, because I don't see this changing for 12 to 18 months until we have a guaranteed bona fide vaccine that you're going to have to test people every single day if you don't want to get sued. So there's a cost to those tests and how accurate those tests are. It doesn't matter, honestly, whether you're doing a small production, a large production, whether I'm doing a book tour. As you know, Tony, I also a corporate speaker. All these things involve groups of people, which none of us can do right now. So as much as people would like to discuss that we're going to go back to work, and Kent has things obviously happening in Utah, the biggest issue that I've seen from my engagements with the PGA just in the last 30 days is the protocol of the trained medical person on a set who's going to stand there just like a TSA person and test everybody, and how fast, again, 10, 15 minutes, you can get close to 100% accuracy no matter what you've wiped down the day before, because all of us go home. And we go home to elsewhere. Yes, Tyler Perry is going to it has base camp that he's going to quarantine, but there are still, as it was said in the movie Outbreak with Dustin Hoffman, it's easy for stuff to get out or easy for stuff to get in. And, we are simply going to have to test every single human on a set every day before I think you'll see a ton of insurance companies be willing to come in. And even still, what is the cost of the insurance based on that? Civil suits versus what's protection under the insurance, that's going to be something that winds up probably getting vetted out in courts. But we don't even have a uniform test yet that we can use every day, and the cost of that to 2 productions, and then how much that particular test helps out the insurance company to give you some sort of decent rate for it. So I'm not trying to be the person with a big question mark, but there's a lot of question marks that are associated with the overall look at this for all of us, of all types of projects, all levels, film and television across the country.
Kevin West, you had your hand up. Can we unmute yourself, Kevin, and join us?
Yes, sir. Thanks, John. Again, there are 32 different current FDA-approved tests, and I just would encourage this body, especially with the fact that Kent has insurance, and there's a lot of questions surrounding what would be non-union projects or what would be any form of a ULB budget, that doing your research on which test you're going to get from which provider you're going to get it from. Again, this is something that if I'm an actor, and I am, first TV show was Matlock, you might want to be looking into, if it's Brooke brought up the ULB films, and Tony, you and I have talked about this over 15 years of knowing each other. No different than if you care about who made your car or who made your shoes. You may want to make sure you're clear on, if you're walking into a production, not only with regards to what their insurance is and what the scope of that insurance is, but also to whom is providing the test that they're buying it from, and how is it going to be implemented? Because there is more than just sticking a swab up your nose. So this is my concern for the place we're in right now for all of us, is we are really early on into a deadly wild west. And it may not kill a bunch of people under 40 years old, but the reality is it can. So who you get your tests from and to whom those has manufactured those tests, and where they fall on the FDA list, I think is something that we need to be exceedingly cognitive of. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
It's going to be a healthy discussion with a lot of informed people that can share their wisdom with us and their facts. This is all about facts today, not conspiracy theories. So with that being said, Kevin E. West, I really want to start with you and finish the discussion that you and I had after the last town hall meeting. Is there something you might be able to bring up?
Do you want to, honestly, Tony, do you want to narrow that down, or do you just want to talk about
So how about this? Do you feel that people are jumping too fast to go back to work?
Absolutely. Not even a question.
Can you explain?
Well, we just had 29,000 cases today in the United States of America, and it's 240 on the West Coast. I love the fact that on the East Coast, John is correct, the epicenter, the beginning of this has quelled, but because Americans want their MTV and it's just a flu, the reality is that all the rest of the states, a lot of where people actually want to go to shoot outside of LA, are blowing up, aside from the fact that California's gone from 6th to 3rd, and we're having the worst outbreak in the last 2 weeks we've had. So my reason for saying that is not because people can't read the white papers, Tony, and can't understand what the protocols are to have a safe set. It's that we've gotten here in the last 6 weeks because everybody kind of just relaxed their shoulders. All of us have seen plenty of people who are not wearing masks. These are the reasons why these 2 sets were shut down. It's what kind of boggles my mind in this business, in this city, that people would be that lax. I expected it actually from my home state of Tennessee. I expected it from Texans. I didn't expect it from people in Southern California and effing Hollywood. So the reality is that our attitude is, I think, just a little laissez-faire, and the reality is, death doesn't care, even though the statistics are what they are. I got them. I know that it's worse for people over 50 and people with underlying conditions, but reality is it doesn't care what age you are, and it doesn't care what ethnicity you are. So wiping down cameras and doing stuff like that does not make your set safe. So that's my biggest concern, and no one discusses testing. Reality, including leadership in the country, and so it's just an issue where I don't think that this is the TSA. I guess that's the easiest way for me to say it. That's what I said to you, Tony. This is the TSA. Until we have a vaccine and enough people have been vaccinated, you have to realize it simply should take you 15 or 20 minutes longer to get to work, meaning you should have to stop and be tested before you go to work. And until that's being done across the board, people are going to get sick. That's the unfortunate reality. So yeah, I think we're doing it a little too quickly. Even with all the white papers out there, I think we are.
You hear on the news where they say some of those numbers are inflated, right? So that's,
I guarantee they are, but go plus or minus 5%. Who cares? That has nothing to do with This is why we have OSHA protocol in a construction site or in a work environment. We're just talking about work safety.
Right.
Screw coronavirus, screw the World Health Organization. We're talking about protocols on work safety. That's all we're discussing. And we're
Kevin.
discussing a virus that can kill you. So the
Kevin.
reality is going into work has to be safe. Part of that safety has to be being tested. And that's not something that I believe, to your question, Tony, is being given its due, considering what we're facing. That's all.
I'm going to throw it to Dan.
Kevin, if you had your druthers, knowing the fact that we will not have any kind of protection as far as an injection for a year maybe, and we'd like to get back to work, there are protocols, and if everybody was tested on a set and everybody wore masks except the actors during their scenes, and if people were wearing gloves, if we had a COVID expert there monitoring, and those testing went on, and we had testing on a daily basis, is that something you could enroll in?
You just summed up exactly what Hollywood's supposed to do. Well, I'll go you even one better, Dan. You don't even have to have a COVID expert on set. That's not necessary. That's why I talked to Tony when we talked on the phone. It's all about the test. You can have somebody with basic medic experience. You don't have to have some expert. You just have to have, the lowest in person at an urgent care who takes blood. I mean, the lowest level EMT. You don't have to have an expert at all. But what you just described, and I can promise you from the top, because we have to look at the top of Hollywood where there's enough money to do this, right, Dan? This is the only way they're going to get back to work. In the last 2 days, I've talked to the executive at DGA, high-end stunt coordinator. I've already been in conversation, obviously, with the top of SAG-AFTRA. I've been working with the Producers Guild, and all of them understand that what you just described is exactly how Hollywood is going to get back to work in terms of Netflix, Sony Television, Universal, etc. What you just said, but you don't have to have an on-set expert, that's for sure.
So go a little further with that, Kevin.
Well, my first question, John, would be, I don't know who you were speaking with, but what test and then what were they paying for it?
Well, I just got it, so I didn't get a chance to study it, and that's one of the things. And I think those are, and that's something that I think we need to clarify with all this stuff, like with Larry. What PPE equipment are we going to use? What test are we going to use? How much does each test cost per test? What is the time frame to get a result on that test? So there's a lot of questions, right?
Sure, and you've got a couple of health people here that can add to what I'm about to say. The bottom line is there is no test on the planet that's 100%. It's number one. There are about 6 or 7 different tests. That's number 2. Number 3, some of the tests actually take 24 hours or days to get a result on. The one that I'm the advocate of, you can get an answer for antibodies, COVID positive or negative or completely clear in 15 minutes, but it's only a first step. Number 4.
What test is that?
That's the Premier Biotech test.
And how much does that cost? How much does that cost per person?
That's the funny part, John. And not that anybody in this group would be surprised by what I'm about to say. First of all, you can get them through me. Diane knows this because we talked about it, because I know the guy who has the U.S.-based distributorship from Premier. But the 6 or 7 other tests, like Jersey is using HealGen, but there's 6 or 7 that are legitimate. They all may have FDA and EUA approval, but something being approved under emergency authorization, which is the EUA part, you have to look at the percentages and at least the study and the medical data that's been done. The Premier Biotech is 97%, and it's in 15 minutes. So that's one of the reasons why, as a community of producers and actors and artists and people, I'm an advocate of that one, because it tests for all 3 things, and it does it in a short enough period of time that if you shouldn't be on set, we can get your ass out of here in a hurry. You can go to see your primary care physician or go to the hospital. And the issue, John, is that McKesson and Shine, the 2 big suppliers to the country who do what everybody else does in this country when people are sick and dying, is they make billions of dollars off of it. The amount of money they're charging when they don't have to is absurd. I'm actually able to get these tests anywhere between lowest order is 20, which you can't get anywhere, up to 15 or 20,000, but you could get them for about $22 or $24 a piece. Your insurance is going to charge you $180, and that's because of what McKesson is charging them to deliver to medical outfits. And I'm sure that Diane and Mr. Wang can speak to that further, but currently I am trying to coordinate and trying to push our industry from the top of all the different unions that they really strongly consider the premier biotech, which I did last Saturday on a Zoom call to myself with a Disney executive and an NBC legal person and a showrunner from a reality show. Like there were like 12 people, and we did it in 15 minutes in front of everybody. So it's like TSA. That's why, Tony, I keep saying it's like TSA. It's like 15 minutes, whatever. So that's kind of a really basic overview. But John, I do want you to understand, because we chatted about this, and I got your answer for you, by the way. The reason why those two sets were shut down is because the crew was not wearing proper PPE on their face. And so, as I said, an actor is going to complain, SAG sends a rep out and shuts your production down. So that's the main reason why both those productions were shut down, is because an actor complained because the crew was not properly wearing a mask. I wanted to cover all of it at once so I can shut up and let other people talk.
Well, hey, Kevin, thank you very much. That was a lot of very informative information.
John, I would share with you, at least at the moment, I respectfully understand the word arbitrary. I don't think it's as arbitrary today as it was 10 days ago. The SAG white papers were done in conjunction with IATSE, which includes the stunt community and the crew. It was done in conjunction with the Writers Guild and the Directors Guild. And then you have the white papers from the AMPTP, which is Association of Motion Picture Television Producers, and you have LA County's white papers. Within those three documents is every single protocol you're supposed to follow to not have your project shut down. Simple as that, which has nothing to do with being sick. That's just the protocol. So that protocol is written and it's crystal clear. The thing that I want to say with regards that I didn't say when I was running my mouth before is that separate out sickness from being able to go on the ride at Disneyland. Production and what we're trying to do, John, because I completely concur with you. My entire career is doing top of show guest stars and guest stars on television. Well, with COVID, and if we don't solve this, they're going to have series regulars only, and my ass will never get another job again. So I'm with you 1,000%, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we need to view this as a conversation as to whether or not you're tall enough to get on the ride at Disneyland. That's what production testing is. Production testing is, here's the invisible door. I pulled up my car at the studio or the base camp parking lot. I walked over to a metaphorical area where I got a test that you have to get quickly. There are tests that take 24 hours. There are tests that take 3 or 4 days. But the Disney hype thing is so that you know before you walk up, you can't stand in this line. So the whole thing with regards to a test that's 97% that has been approved by Johns Hopkins, Stanford Medical, and is backed by Joseph Caden at USC, who's the head of infectious diseases and epidemiology, that you get an answer as to whether or not you're allowed to go on the ride in 15 minutes that covers positive, negative, and antibodies. That's one of the reasons why it's the one that I'm trying to get the DGA, the Writers Guild, SAG-AFTRA, and IATSE to agree on so we can do exactly what you said, John, because testing and being able to be on set is one, and then the rest of the protocols are two. And if you're sick, you just go away, and that's the rest. That's your personal life where you go to a hospital. So it's 3 different things. We can't conflate them. And the 2 sets were shut down simply because they weren't following just the on-set PPE requirements of those white papers that have already been put out. I'm out.
Kevin, don't go out, Kevin. I got I got a couple more questions for you. You don't get off that easy. No, that's great stuff, man. But here's my question, 2 of them. One is, so I'm assuming, and tell me if I'm right or wrong, that therefore, to make this effective, obviously, we need to test every single person every single day of a shoot, right? So that's because every day a person goes home, they could potentially get it the next day, correct? So it's an everyday.
That's one of the reasons why Tyler Perry is trying to do what he's calling Camp Quarantine in Atlanta.
Correct, which he has.
It's cute, but you still, if anybody leaves, it's just like the movie Outbreak. They shut the city down in the movie because you can't leave. I am not cognitive of knowing that if you are found to be sick and you're on a daily contract, or again, I presume, John, we're talking more about short film agreements, ultra low budget, modified low budget, and low budget. I'm guessing that's sort of.
Yeah, and weekly deals with crew, weekly deals with actors, et cetera. So you're not on necessarily a daily. Yeah, a daily actor would be a daily contract, correct? But say you're on a weekly thing. You've been hired for run a show. You're the DP, and you show up sick. Now the DP gets to go home. But according to what I've understood about it, and I could be wrong, and that's what I'm trying to figure out with other people, the DP now gets paid for his contract and we replace him. And if that happens for 5 people, we have to do it for 5 people, 10 people, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm just wondering, how does that sense of certainty work?
I certainly apologize, John. I would think that's the reason why you have insurance, because if someone shows up, that's why they can't cross into the Disney line. If someone shows up sick, gets tested and is sick, I don't see how, I don't know who shared, I don't know who presented that to you, but I don't see how you are required to pay them for being sick and having to go home on a weekly based on having insurance, which you have to have anyway. So I do not want to ever misstate any actual fact that would be a legal thing. But I will check on that answer, because I'm not conscious of the fact, I'm not conscious of it based on that scenario, but I will get you the answer.
And again, that's
the reason why, I'm sorry, Tony, that's the reason why what the test is and how it's administered is so important, because it's just like being a safe driver. You hear it all the time, safe driver discount, safe driver discount. It lowers your insurance. Well, if your car is in better shape and it's better kept and has less miles, and you're older and you're not 20 years old, driving a car, your insurance goes down. So when you put your proposal in for the insurance, and Dan would know this, is that what you're providing them that you're going to do on your set is going to be related to how much each of those, think of it as the reverse of uninsured motorists for your insurance, for your own car insurance, or getting hit by somebody that's not insured. So the more insurance company can feel like that you're going to lessen the likelihood that you're going to have to enact your insurance because somebody actually went to work, not showed up for work, went to work sick, then you're probably going to be better off with what your insurance costs are. And that's why the tests and the onset slide EMT or whatever, your setup is so important to how you go about getting insurance.
But Kevin, I'm going to let you jump in because you're very excited. So let's go.
I'm not that excited, John. I stopped having coffee several hours ago, which I should not be allowed to have. I'm going to say a couple of things that are probably not going to be very popular, but Tony's known me a long time. I'm going to try and use as many analogies as I possibly can. First and foremost, you don't get given the right to make movies. This is the same as driving is a privilege. It's not a right. This is why you have to get a license for it. And this is why you have to have insurance for it. And yes, we all know there are people on the road whose cars are not in as good a condition. Their brakes are not in as good condition, and they can cause an accident and kill you. And if they do that, they're responsible for killing you. So let me address Nunzio, because they're all good questions. Number one, deliveries and food. Every single takeout place that has been functioning since COVID, all of their workers wear gloves, and all of them wipe down and if you were to get infected because of a delivery place, guess who gets sued? The delivery place, not your production. So that's number one.
But you know who you're getting infected by is the real issue.
I understand that, but I'm just sharing with you that
3 days.
That there's no place in the world, or there's no set that's going to ever be able to be hermetically sealed. I started out today by saying there is no test on the planet that is 100%. So if you just take that premise, then there is no complete way to say that every single hermetically sealed corner of the wind makes it perfect. It just isn't. This is partly personal responsibility and also professional intelligence. So that's number one. Number two, I don't care whether a set's union or non-union. It's no different than Nunzio, you or me taking our kids to go skiing or to go hiking or to go anywhere. There's a certain degree of personal responsibility in simply deciding and choosing that your shit is going to be in order, that I'm going to go take you someplace and not do something irresponsibly to harm you. And that does come down to the people running the job, whether it's union or not, whether it's 26 days or 37 days, you simply are responsible as the employer. I'm just saying how the law looks at it. For
Kevin, I agree with you. But I was asked to take over a film 3 days ago, and I said, have you been testing anyone for COVID? I said, do you do temperature checks? I said, are people wearing masks? When I heard no to 2 of those 3 answers, I said, count me out.
Of course. Well, that was Tony and I's conversation a week ago after we got off this call. I was like, man, people are acting like this is literally a hoax and it's the Wild West, except for the fact that people died. So the SAG rep also does not have to come and shut a set down by being actually engaged. The SAG rep could drive up from 100 yards away and watch a set for 15 minutes and see 6 crew people without mask engaging right around the DP and right around the actors, your set is shut down. So a SAG rep doesn't have to get anywhere near to be endangering anybody, tested or not, to shut a set down. So that's that one. Mr. Wang brought up the fact that cleanliness, yes, these are things why you would have somebody, you can take your second, you can do a lot of ways to make sure that your house, for lack of a better phrase, our moving house we call the set, is actually as tight and clean and safe as possible. And to the end result of this, and I think Dan was on this, or somebody said somebody was a line producer. What's going to have to happen, and by the way, this is going to also happen at the top. It doesn't matter whether it's Netflix, Sony, doesn't matter if it's Michael Bay or Tyler Perry. The bottom line is, guess what's going to happen, like it always does in our lives? We shift money. Money is now going to go in a budget that's going to go into safety and testing, and it's going to come out of, you're not going to have an extra 17 condiments and an extra breakfast or an extra cinnamon roll or whatever. You're not going to have, you're going to take half a grip truck and cut it. However you do the budget, listen, unfortunately, that's not SAG's problem. It's not the DGA problem. It's not the LA County problem. And it sure as hell isn't the Producers Guild problem. That's your problem. Your household budget is your household problem. And I don't mean it rudely. I'm just saying this situation is already bad enough as it is. I don't want to see us attach things that are made somebody else's responsibility that at the end of the day are still just simply part of what you would call the budget of your house or the budget of a vacation and keeping your family safe. There's a natural element of that just simply is at play in all of this. And it's going to continue to be. And even when we do have a vaccine, not only, John, are some people going to refuse to even take the vaccine, who knows when we're going to have one that we can even be certain is actually, I think we're at least staring at least 12 to 18 months minimum. And I'm just hoping people will begin to realize we're going to have to cut a little bit on this and cut a little. You know, we started writing scripts 20 years ago. Tony, we talked about this with digital technology, where we began to slowly change the way we literally wrote scripts based on digital ability and how much we could be more flexible, based on being able to bring budgets down because you could do things quicker, cleaner, faster. We did that just based on money. Well, this conversation is not any different. Testing costs money. Cleanliness costs money. Safety costs money. So you just maybe have to pull a scene or two and rewrite some shit and do it differently with 2 people, sitting on a couch with a thing and a guy. I mean, I'm just saying we have to, necessity is the mother of invention. And there's a lot of that exists in this world that we now find ourselves in.
Absolutely. Kevin, you look like you were about to say something.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Per what Adrian brought up, I mean, I know 3 people already who've shot union commercials in their house because the production company brings the entire production to their front door and leaves it with them. They coordinate hiring a friend to assist them with setting up all the stuff. They give them all the instructions. They leave the house. This is just like having your floors redone. The crew comes in, everything's wiped down, they're tested, they leave all the stuff, they leave the house, you shoot the commercial on your own, you put all the stuff aside, they come back and pick it up. I mean, we're in crazy new times, and a lot of this stuff is going to be done. Obviously, I can't speak to a lot of non-union stuff because that goes back to the fact that I don't do it. It's not but it still to me is the same thing as the car analogy. There are plenty of non-union productions, and you know this, Tony, that have more money than freaking union ones.
Oh yeah.
So it's not how much money you have in the damn bank. It's how do you spend it. If we're just on this conversation of safety and life and death, how is somebody managing the money someone has? Because one person's doing an ultra low budget film with 150 grand, and somebody else is doing a non-union thing with 250. Don't get me started on being a scab and crossing the line because that won't be a good response from me, but it doesn't make any difference. Safety is safety. It doesn't matter if you're on a jet ski in Lake Havasu or on a jet ski in Montana. It's still a jet ski on the water. So I just don't want us to get caught up in minutia that doesn't really apply to how safe we are being with regards to, but the commercial production entities have already come away to skinny crews, leave stuff at your house. I mean, they'll all figure out ways to shoot new shit. And we've already seen the farmers commercials and the progressive spots where they basically have gotten my friend J.K. Simmons or Flo to record new voiceovers at home, and they just recut a spot so you hear the new voiceover, but it's just the same image as they had on 7 other spots they ran last year. So they'll find all sorts of ways to do it, but I just, for me, it's It's how money is spent and how safe you're choosing to be, and not nearly as much about what the union status of something is. No, you're going to see it next week. You're going to wind up seeing it in the trades. I guarantee you.
And we're going to share it here Friday next week.
I'm just changing. I'm just adjusting my lighting as we speak. See, Thank you.
Be safe, everybody. Be well, stay well, and thank you, everybody, for your participation. Appreciate you.
Got to be tall enough to ride the ride.